In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, Amen. Father God, come be with us today. Fill our hearts with joy. Fill our minds with learning. Fill our classroom with peace. Fill our lessons with fun. Fill our friendship with kindness. And fill our school with love. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, Amen.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good
Good
afternoon po.
afternoon po.
Good afternoon
Good
po.
afternoon
Afternoon
po.
po.
Good afternoon. We are the group three. We are the group three. Our topic for today to be discussed is about making social inclusive and competence of special and inclusive education. I'm with Miss Toledo Josrel, Miss Maralit Micaela, Miss Ocampo Risha, Miss De Castro Desiree, and yours truly, Alisa Aguado. Now, we've moved on. We've moved on finding out how to implement the inclusive practices in the classroom. It provides parti- provide insights and practical tips on cultivating inclusive habits and implementing such practices in the classroom effectively. The next slide po. Creating inclusive cultures. Any idea about creating inclusive cultures? Anyone? Okay. Creating inclusive cultures, this is one that embraces our differences in experience, ways of thinking, and respecting people. In, okay, the next one is inclusion is as much the responsibility of society as the responsibility of schools. For the inclusion, practices in special education of placing children with disabilities into the general classroom. Education is the strongest when it embraces diversity. Learners should not adapt to the system. Instead, education system should adapt their needs. What um, what do you mean by this? Inclusion is as much the responsibility of society as it is the responsibility of school. Anyone?
Alisa, pardon.
Inclusion is as much the responsibility of society as it is the responsibility of school.
Permission to speak.
Yes, Miss Ariel?
I think because school is also a social part of uh, of life of the students. That's why it is responsibility of society na
Okay.
if something's happen inside the school, um, it is also have to be the society must be also, even if it is outside the school, society also have to be informed what is happening inside the school.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Ariel. When we say inclusion, it's the practices in special education of placing children with disabilities into general classroom. And it says that mas may responsibility dapat ang society than school. For example is um for example is when a student feel not welcome in school, they are disliked to learn. That's why it's everyone's loss. Kapag hindi nafi-feel ng isang student with disabilities na hindi siya belong sa school or sa place na pinupuntahan niya, especially sa school nga, nawawalan siya ng gana pumasok. That's why, hindi din kailangan na ang student ang mag-adapt sa society that hindi kailangan ang student lagi ang mag-adapt sa kanyang sa kanyang pupuntahan, kundi dapat na-adapt din ng society yung children with disability. We shall learn that inclusive education is an ongoing collaborative process that need to be dynamically revisited. Invested in the welfare and success of a school and its students. For the stakeholders. In education reform, stakeholders are those who are invented in the welfare and success of a school and its student. Stakeholders are important because they play a major role in connecting what is being taught in school to its surrounding and community. Katulad nga sinabi ko kanina, sa inclusion na dapat ina-adapt din ng society ang isang student with disabilities, stakeholders naman ay siya naman yung nagko-connect sa students and its surrounding. It invested welfare and success of a school and its students. The stakeholders are the teachers, administrators, school staff, official and other workers, the parents and their families, the community, and the government. They may also be collective entities like local businesses, advocacy groups, the media, the socio-cultural institution, and the other organization that may be directly or indirectly involved in education. What stakeholders can do, the rights-based approach to educational programming insists that no right can exist without a corresponding governmental obligation by Van den Brul, Bolskat, and Sandkal 2005. What do you mean by that quotation? No right can exist without a corresponding governmental obligation. Anyone? No one can exist without a corresponding governmental obligation. Okay. It says that walang rights na pwedeng mag-exist kapag hindi connected sa government. And that right na yun ay protected at responsibility pa rin ng isang government. The governments and communities are starting to understand how they are accountable to children with additional needs in fulfilling their rights to education and providing access to quality education that is also safe, welcoming, and inclusive, legally defining terms and formalizing a system for setting up inclusive schools in areas where there are none to begin, with ensures uniformity, universality, consistency of implementation, and eventual success of inclusion in the country. It says that dapat is ready tayo sa pagko-combine ng student with disabilities to the normal people or to the normal students. Kailangan ay hindi lamang ang school, ang society, then the government is ready to combine. There are set of parameters of inclusion. What do you mean by the set of parameters for inclusion? Set the parameter for inclusion, effective inclusive education, playing children in age-appropriate grade, plays, special classes, cooperative learning, practiced where teachers can share ideas for improvement of educational system. The government has the identified key people and profession and highlighted important factors leading to successful of inclusive education. Placement process, committees, staffing and responsibilities, teacher training and compensation, incentives for private sector participation, and collaboration of the Department of Education with the other branches of government. This clearly shows not just an attempt to centralize inclusive practices, but an initiative to make the welfare and development of children with additional needs and the responsibility of all. The other one is the build key people. The government recognizes the needs of training both in the special needs education and general education level. Um, it also pushes for the use of evidence-based teaching frameworks and provision of students assistance and access to instructional materials. Sa Build Key People is nire-recognize din ng government kung ano yung mga needs pa ng needs for teacher training at sa special needs education and general education level. UNESCO 2005 state that clarity of purpose, realistic goals, motivation, support, resources, and evaluation of policies and practices all contribute to a successful shift toward inclusion. The Philippine government seems to be in consonance with the aspect in the light of its existing legislative policies that ground the undeniable importance of inclusion. It is also continually recognizing structures in education and implementing programs that highlight the need for primary stakeholders like the schools, parents, and other policymakers to acquire more understanding and capacity building to manage an inclusive environment. Again, what is the two steps stakeholders can take to create inclusive cultures? Anyone?
Ito ba yung build key people, yung mga ganun.
Yes, the build key people and the set the parameter for inclusion. Next po.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jesra C. Toledo, and I'm going to discuss the barriers to inclusion. So, first, we have physical barriers. So, what do you mean by physical barriers? When we say physical barriers, is the lack of building, facility, transportation, or road accessibility are types of physical barriers that can literally affect one's mobility. So when we say physical barriers, what comes to your mind when we say physical barriers? Anyone? So okay, when we say physical barriers, it is the one who block the person who have mobility or disability. For example, step and curbs that block a person with mobility impairment from entering a building or using a sidewalk. Next, we have curriculum. Okay, we have curriculum, a rigid or one-size-fits-all types of curriculum that does not allow room for individual differences can significantly stunt one's learning and opportunity for growth. So when we say curriculum, this is kind of curriculum that does not provide space for the individual with a difference where where not hinder a person's learning and opportunity for development. Next, we have lack we have poor language and communication. When we say poor language communication, it is language barriers may also directly have implications on how well inclusive practices are implemented. So, in poor language and communication, it means it can also have direct implication on how well implement inclusive practices. Um, Especially when children with poor language areas. The impact of having poor spoken language affects educational outcomes, social relationship, employability, and places young people at risk of poor mental health and offending. Next barrier is lack of funding. This means for training more teachers as well as coming up with more appropriate programs, instructional materials, or facilities. Lack of funds can be limiting and debilitating to school. So sa lack of funding naman, can be limiting and exhausting in school. So it can have limiting and exhausting in school. So we should adequate funding where it could allow for the training of more teacher as well as the development of more appropriate programs, instructional equipment, or facilities. Next, we have lack of policies. Lack of policies have the ability to unify beliefs and mobilize resources. Unfortunately, lack of it can become a convenient justification for inaction. So ano po pag sinabi nating lack of policies? So okay, kasi of facilities, yun nga, may kakayahan silang magsama-sama for inaction. Next is organization of educational system. Dito naman, a centralized system may have some type of detachment in terms of implementing policies and seeing the reality of how such policies are affecting learners and other stakeholders. So, sa organization of educational system, it says that these are the centralized system where there may be some sort of detachment in terms of implementing policies and see the reality how such policies affect students and other stakeholders. Last, last barriers to inclusion is too much focus on performance based standards. Schools have also reportedly refused inclusion because of fear that the presence of learning with additional needs will pull down the rankings in standard tests. So, dito, ayun nga, yung sa mga paaralan ay kailangan ay na napaparating nila or nare-report yung mga inclusion para sa mga peer na nakakaharap ng mga estudyante na may kapansanan. So, to enumerate, what are the barriers to inclusion? Anyone can answer?
Permission to speak.
Agila po.
Okay, Aguila?
So the barriers to inclusion is including the physical barriers, curriculum, poor language and communication, lack of funding, lack of policies, organization of educational systems, too much focus on performance-based standards.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Aguila. So, next slide po. So, in this slide, we discuss how different special education, mainstreaming, and inclusive education are from each other. So, what are the differences? Those three from each other. So, in learners, what are the difference of the three? In special education, students who are not part of the classroom norms. So sa learners, pag special education, yung mga student is hindi siya part ng classroom norm. Ibig sabihin nakahiwalay siya. Sa inclusion naman, all same age, peers, learner are in one class regardless of ability. So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng magkakaedad, lahat ng magkakaibigan, mga kaklase is, or yung mga may kapansanan is, sama-sama sila sa isang classroom. So, in mainstream naman, selected learners are included in the general based on their readiness instead of their age. So, sa mainstreaming, those selected learners is nagbe-base sila based on the readiness nga kaysa sa doon sa age ng learners. In curriculum naman, how different, what is the differences of these three? So, in special education, in curriculum, is strengths-based and needs-based, individualized curriculum. So, mas nagbe-base sila kung kung gaano kung kaano yung sense ng isang learner. Streaming naman, learners may have access to both general education, curriculum, and a more individualized curriculum. So, yung mga mag-on, curriculum, and sa yung pang individualized curriculum lang. Next is assessment evaluation. So, sa assessment and evaluation naman, in special education, ay, sorry po, naglalag. So, we are here in assessment and evaluation, right?
Yes po.
Okay. In assessment and evaluation, okay, thank you po. In assessment and evaluation, in specialization, mostly strength, at in time sa learner. Sa mainstreaming naman is both norm reference and strength based. So, kumbaga, pinagsama ni yung education and kailangan for mainstreaming. Next is learning, placement, and delivery of service inside. All services happen inside the special education classroom, but other services such as the therapeutic intervention may be integrated into this setting or delivered separately. So, dito, lahat daw ng services na nangyayari sa loob ng special education classroom, lahat daw nangyayari ng ang services. Pero, yung ibang services, katulad ng therapeutic intervention, ay maaaring mag-integrate into the settings or delivered na magkahiwalay. Yon. Inclusion naman, all services happen inside the general education classroom. So, lahat ng services ay nangyayari sa loob naman ng general education classroom. In mainstreaming, receives services in both the general education classroom and outside through the use of resource rooms and therapeutic programs. So, natatanggap naman yung mga services sa parehas na general education classroom and also the outside sa pamamagitan ng resource rooms. Last is the philosophy. In special education, the philosophy, learner-centered. Some learners have very specific needs that may not be appropriately addressed in a general education classroom. So, yung sa learner-centered or yung ibang all learners have right to access quality education that is available to others. So, sa right base naman yung sa inclusion. Right base naman siya. So, lahat ng learners ay magkakaroon ng right para maka-access sila sa quality education na available sa iba. So, in mainstreaming, preparatory and integrative naman. So, yung mga mag-aaral ay binibigyan ng access sa general education. Pero, we need to catch up skill first. So, ibig sabihin, yung mga mag-aaral ay binibigyan ng access sa education. Pero, mas kinakailangan nga nila yung skills or ability muna ng isang mag-aaral bago bigyan sila ng access for general education. So, that's all. That's my report. I hope na everyone have yun lang po. Thank you po.
Next slide po. Producing inclusive policies. The premise of inclusion starts with an acceptance and embracing of diversity. It is difficult to start movement if this practice is not rooted on a culture that assumes that the right perspective and values. So, the inclusion is learned to accept and know what diversity is. As an individual, it is difficult to move or to socialize even if you as a person, you didn't know about what aspect of it in culture. Para sa sabay-sabay na pagbabago ng paradigm na mangyari sa kanilang edukasyon, kailangan nilang lumikha o mag-create ng bagong culture ang isang paaralan. The UNESCO 2005 United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization realistically acknowledged that a societal change in attitude need not to be initially present in a community before inclusion can be fully practiced. Rather, it must be viewed as a perspective or an ideal to toward this realization. differences in standards and quality of education may surface as potential problem. So, ang sinasabi po dito, ang pagbabago sa ugali ng lipunan ay hindi kailangan naroon sa simula. It must be viewed as a perspective o iisang mainang patungo sa pagkakasakatuparan nito. Ang mga pagkakaiba sa pamantayan at kalidad ng edukasyon ay maaaring magbigay ng potential as a problem. So, the pre-service curriculum ay muling inayos, hindi lamang ito binibigay sa mga may special needs, kundi sa iba pang may kailangan nito. Halimbawa, bilang isang SOCSTAD major, dapat aware tayo sa ganitong bagay. Kasi bilang future educator, dapat alam natin kung sino ang mga nararapat dito. Hindi lamang siya nagpo-portray about values. Dapat ang ibang major ay may alam din ito. Ito ay isang hakbang para sa guro ang isang inclusive education. Naintindihan po ba?
Opo.
Okay. The inclusive other sectors in society. Ano po ba sa tingin ninyo ang mga sektor sa ating lipunan? Ang mga sektor po sa ating lipunan ay ang pamahalaan, simbahan, pamilya, paaralan at mga negosyo. The involved other sectors of society, current training and awareness campaign seems to limit the movement of inclusion to a mere homeschool relationship. At most, these are extended to the departments for social welfare and health. However, for an inclusive setup to be truly be successful, active involvement of the entire community must be ensured. So, ang mga kasulukuyang pagsasanay at kamalayan ay tila nalimitahan ang movement of inclusion sa homeschool relationship. Sa karamihan, ang mga ito ay pinalawak sa mga kagawaran para sa kapakanang panlipunan at kalusugan. Para sa maikasatuparan ang isang inclusive setup, dapat matiyak nito ang matagumpay na aktibong pakikilahok ng buong komunidad. Halimbawa, ang may mga business, commercial at mga nasa relihiyosong sektor ay dapat din bigyan ng representasyon sa mga pagsasanay. Ang mga sektor na ito ay dapat na may sapat na saklaw. Kung sa business, pwede ang mall, restaurant. So, sa mga nagdaang taon hanggang sa ngayon, malaki ang interest ng mga tao about PWD. Madami silang nagawa para makatulong sa mga ito, para ma-develop ang kanilang skills and abilities. So, the idea of it is for everyone, for their training purposes, or parang maging more sensitive and be aware of the PWD population. Kung mas may kamalayan ng isang komunidad, mas makakatulong ito. So, collaborative. Ano pong naisip nyo about collaborative? Anyone?
Combination.
Yes, tama po. The collaborative is whether creating an academic program specific to a child with additional needs of creating a new legislative bill for PWD community. Collaboration is crucial. So, each member of the inclusive education team would have their own strengths and weaknesses. And these have to be used wisely to benefit the child with additional needs. So, whether creating an academic program specific to a child with additional needs or creating a new legislative bill for the PWD, yun nga, sinasabi ko na collaboration is crucial. So, ang bawat pangkat ng inclusive education ay magkakaroon ng sarili nilang kalakasan at kahinaan. And these have to be used wisely to benefit the child with additional needs. So, Del Coro Chanco, 2014, states that the general education teachers are trained in the general curriculum but would not know how to teach and manage children with additional needs, while a special needs education teacher would be equipped to handle atypical behaviors but would not know much about the general education curriculum. True collaboration would guarantee an inclusive program that would cover as many areas as possible. So, ang sinasabi po dito na hindi lahat ng guro na nag-training in general curriculum ay alam kung paano mapangisawaan o gamay ang mga behaviors ng may mga special needs. while the special education teachers ay may alam na kung paano i-handle ang mga behaviors na may special needs, ngunit hindi sapat ang kanilang kaalaman about general curriculum. So, parang ang sinasabi dito na daig ng madiskarte at ng may experiences ang taong may alam lamang. Next, and recognize the shift in roles of the teachers. So with the shift to inclusive education, the role of the special education teachers or SPED suddenly seems to be reduced to only as needed. As a result, the SPED teacher's role no longer become that of an implementer but that of a consultative nature instead. So, it also becomes the responsibility of the general education teacher to know what to do when faced with a learner with additional needs in his or her classroom. So, ang sinasabi po dito na ang SPED teacher ay hindi magiging tagapagtupad, kundi pagiging makonsulta sa mga mag-aaral. Responsibilidad ng guro na malaman kung ano ba ang gagawin kapag nakaharap ka sa students with special needs. So the role of the SPED teacher is based on their trainings, their insights, and their skills in inclusive education. Sa halip, ang mga ito ay dapat gamitin upang matiyak na ang isang mahusay na inclusive program ay ibinibigay sa mga taong may special needs. General education teachers must go through skills, training, and workshop to ensure that they are supporting all the types of learners in their classroom. Include transition in planning. An abrupt, systematic change that is not well planned or that disregard practices, whether existing or implied, may hinder the shift to inclusion and cause resentment from all stakeholders. Instead, current practices have to be respected and honored so as to facilitate a gradual shift to an inclusive education. So, ang sinasabi po dito na ang biglaang pagbabago sa plano ay maaari makahadlang sa paglipat sa pagsasagawa of ng inclusion. So, instead, the current practices have to be respected and honored para mapadali ang unting-unting paglipat sa inclusive education. Booth and Ainscoe 2002 recommended that school reflects on their current facility, policies, and practices to check their readiness for an inclusive setup. They also devised a questionnaire that would help administrator, faculty, and other stakeholders comprehensively gather baseline data. So specifically, schools may look at the following: the student admission, accessibility to utilities and facilities, learners accommodation, inclusionary or discriminatory incidents, number of bullying cases, and the faculty and the staff promotion. So, dapat pag-isipang mabuti ang mga kasulukuyang mga patakaran at practices to easily adopt the inclusive setup. Dapat lahat ay magbebenepisyo sa school and accessible siya sa lahat ng students with or without special needs. Yun lamang po. May tanong po?
Wala po.
Next reporter po.
Now that they are done discussing the first two dimensions of Booth and Ainscoe's three dimensions index, which is dimension A, refers to creative inclusive culture, and dimension B, which is producing inclusive policies, we will now tackle and discuss its third dimension, which is the dimension C, evolving inclusive practices. The first two dimensions talks about administrators should create an inclusive culture in its stakeholders and then build encompassing policies. In this dimension, we want to reach a point where inclusive teaching practices are expected. As you can see here in our slide, there are four main characteristics of evolving inclusive practices para mas madali nyo maunawaan ang dimension na ito. The first one is evolve and advancement. Ang evolve and advancement is tumutukoy sa pagbabago or pag-a-adjust ng mga bagay-bagay. Ang tinutukoy ng evolve and advancement dito is that kapag nakapag-create na ng culture at policies ang administrators, dito na papasok yung application or yung pagtuturo sa diverse set of students. Since na-identify na ang diverse culture at policies, as teachers, kailangan ding mag-evolve or magkaroon ng advancement sa strategies nila in terms of teaching the diverse set of students. Now, paano ba nila may improve ang strategy nila? Maaaring mag-create sila ng new set of strategies or pwede nilang i-adjust yung existing strategies nila according sa pangangailangan ng estudyante. Naintindihan po yung part ng evolve and advancement?
Yes po. Opo.
Now, since nalaman natin na nag-evolve ang strategies or way of teaching ng teachers according to the needs of the students, the second part is we need to know why we need to consider the needs of our students. We need to consider the needs of our students because the main objective of this dimension, which is the most essential part of learning, is through students' participation. Kung hindi natin alam ang needs nila, then this will cause a poor or lack of participation from the students, and hindi lahat is willing mag-participate because they cannot relate to the way of teachers teaching. Lastly, all of the children should have an equal opportunity to succeed in education, regardless of their background, academic ability, and cognitive level. Naintindihan po ba ang evolving inclusive practices?
Opo.
Do you have any questions?
None so far po.
Okay, again, to sum it all up, evolving inclusive practices is a teaching approach that recognizes the differences between students and uses this to ensure that all students can access educational content, participate fully in their learning, and to understand that no two pupils are the same. Moving on, let us now discuss the two sections of evolving inclusive practices. These sections refers to the strategy that a teacher uses for students' participation. The first one is orchestrating learning. So in here, the main focus of the strategy is through lessons. Yung lessons ba na ginamit is responsive to the diverse of students? These lessons should give encouragement to the students to be involved in all aspects of their education. The second one is mobilizing resources. So in here, the main focus of the strategy is through material resources. Ang material resources is yung mga instructional materials or utilities. So same din ang orchestrating learning, material resources should be used and understood by variety of students para makapag-participate sila sa klase. Naintindihan po ba?
Yes po.
Salamat. Okay, again, lessons and material resources are the strategies that were used to acquire students' participation. Next slide po. Let us move on. There are two effective-based inclusive practices that can be used in classroom. The first one is the Universal Design for Learning or UDL. As you can see, meron ditong statement stated by Dukes and Dukes Lamar. In architecture, universal designs refers to the structure that were made in such way that they can be used by customers or clients with a wide range of needs. Sabi dito sa statement, sa architecture, kinoconsider ng architect ang design ng building according sa iba't ibang needs ng consumers and customers. So in learning, ganun din. Universal design for learning refers to the design of instructional material and activities to make the content and information accessible to all of the students. Kapag gumagawa ang mga teachers ng instructional materials, lahat ng estudyante is kinoconsider nila sa paggawa ng design ng instructional materials para makarelate at makapag-participate ang lahat. Naintindihan ang universal design for learning?
Opo. Yes po.
Now let's discuss the three elements of universal design of learning for learning. Itong mga elements is yung kinoconsider sa paggawa ng design ng instructional materials. The first one is multiple means of representation. Ang kinoconsider dito is how can I present information yon? Sorry sa typo. How can I present information in a way that reach all learners? Paano ako gagawa ng instructional material na maiintindihan ng lahat? Or what options can I provide for the students who need support engaging with text or with auditory learning? Ang pwede ditong example is provide options for engaging with text like text-to-text speech, audiobooks, or partner reading. Next, multiple means of action and expression. How can I offer purposeful options for students to show what they offer? Or have I considered methods aside from paper and pencil task for student to show what they know? So, ang pwede ditong maging example is of course, recitations or other creative activities like poster presentation, and graphic organizer. Lastly, multiple means of engagement. How can I engage all students in my class? Or how can I relate the topics to all of the students? Ang pwede ditong options or example ay you can say survey students about their interest, strength, and needs. Incorporate also their findings or reflection to the lesson. Naintindihan po yung 3 elements of universal design of learning. Okay, thank
Apo.
you po. Next
Yes po.
reporter na po.
Next slide po. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Desiree De Castro from BSED 2B major in Social Studies. Disclaimer before I start my presentation, it contains is my views and opinions. I am not encouraging nor forcing you to believe, change your perspective or anything. I just explain it only for my presentation. Let's start with the basic. So what comes into your mind when you hear the word differentiate? Miss Bravo, what is your idea when you hear the word differentiate?
For me po, when I hear the word differentiate, you need to know the difference between the two objects po.
Thank you. Now, who among you believe on saying, kung kaya nila, kaya ko rin? Anyone?
Ako po.
Yes, Miss
Ako po.
Jinky
Ako
and
po.
Miss Angeline, Miss Liza. Why do you believe on that?
Permission to speak.
Yes, Miss Jinky.
So, kagaya po nung sabi nyo na kung kaya ng iba, kaya ko rin. So, that motto is my motto also in life na iniisip ko palagi na kung nakakaya nga ng iba kahit mahirap, so alam ko na kaya ko din. 'Di ba? Kasi kung ano yung skills na meron yung isang tao, alam ko sa sarili ko na meron din akong skills na yon. Ayun po.
Thank you. Miss Angeline, do you have something to add more or none?
Yes po. Meron po. Kung kaya po nila, kaya ko rin po. Kasi po, pwede naman po nating subukan eh. Hindi naman po masamang mag-try po. Kumbaga po is, wala naman pong mahirap kung hindi mo susubukan. Kaya kakayanin po hanggang sa ma-achieve ko po.
Okay, thank you. Again, I am not here to change what you believe in. But please, allow me to share my views and opinions about it. Personally, ever since I was a child, I don't really believe on that. Because in every aspect, 2 out of 10 people has the same characteristic in learning, in thinking, and etc. However, even though they have similarities, they also have unique sides. For example, me and Dayan both study at night. We drink coffee for a more activated mind, and we are both active in classes. But I can say that I am more active in recitation if the topic is based on experience. While on the other hand, Dayan is more active if the topic is based on music or involve creative thinking. We both try our best to be active on both fields. But sometimes, we can't. And that's how I can say that kung kaya mo or kung kaya nila, kaya ko rin may not be applicable to everyone. Personally, I think this quotation may trigger some people, specifically students. Because they will always be doubting themselves, comparing themselves to other and feeling insecurities, as well as mental and emotional damage. In simple words, it can shatter the life and the well-being of anyone. Why do you believe on that? Because I experienced that myself. I experienced a situation where everyone kept telling me that I can do it because they did. But I can't. People can draw, but I can't. People can dance good or excellently, but I can't. I can draw, but my drawing is like in its preparatory stage, and sometimes they can do better than mine. Lastly, I can dance. It's just I'm never on the beat, but I can offer imagination that I can be used or they can use in dancing and drawing. I can be a best critic person. Tell me the critics of all people I can say. Although I can't dance and draw, I know what good step and concept is. Now, what is differentiate instruction? Now that we see how one another is different to each other, we can say differentiate instruction is a teaching approach that tailors instruction to all student learning needs, presupposes that students learn in different ways and at different paces. All the students have the same learning goal, but the instruction varies on student interest, preferences, strengths, and struggle. For example, me and Angeline is both active in recitation, but she can understand technicalities or word from technical meanings. On the other hand, I learn in using it in daily basis activities, or if you relate it to the experience. We both learn. Am I right? We are different in getting learnings, but we both learn in differentiate instruction. And that is the main point of differentiate instruction. To learn in modalities and to learn where students are comfortable. So why do we think or why do we need to differentiate the instruction? Miss Angelica, why do you think we need to differentiate the instructions?
I think for better understanding po. That's all po.
Thank you. Miss Liza, do you want to add some more?
Paulit nga po ng tanong.
Why do we need to use or to have a differentiate instructions?
Okay po. Siyempre po, we need to differentiate the instruction para po mas malaman po natin kung ano pa dapat ang gawin. Yun po, kung ano pa dapat po ang gawin.
Thank you. All your answers are correct. Instead of having a standard method, we can use differentiate instruction with the same goal. Because that works me or doesn't necessarily mean will also work to everyone else. If I will give you a task to create an essay about how velocity works in 5 minutes for me to determine the speed and motion, can you assure me that you can do it? Miss Jinky Bravo, can you assure me that you can create an essay about velocity in 5 minutes?
If my IQ is high, of course I can. 'Di ba? Because naniniwala kasi ako na kapag alam mo naman yung isang topic kahit mahirap, kaya mo pa ding i-deliver. In 5 minutes siguro kung super kung pagbabasehan is yung IQ mo is at kung naiintindihan mo din yung about sa velocity, siguro kahit wala pang 5 minutes kaya mo nang gawa ng essay. Ayun po.
That's correct. If you have knowledge on it, you can answer it with your snap of your hands or anytime. But you can do it for those people who doesn't understand or doesn't understand it deeply, they need assistance of the Google. You need to listen and absorb the whole lesson. But if the athlete is the person that I'm asking, they can show me the velocity, how it works, or they can actually create an output without given a time. Both situation reach my goal, right? They can use or they can create an essay but in a different position. Let me give you another example. Our topic is creative performance. If I ask each and every one of you to be a poet or makata, can you all do that? Some may say, yes, we can. Some may say, they will do it for compliance, or they can do it on just a basic or or in a minimum state. But if you ask them, did they enjoy? Of course not. Did they express their effort and feelings properly? No. Is the output presentable? I bet not. What we need to do is a teacher to be a flexible. Yes, student can be a flexible, but their own output cannot be stretched enough for the whole class. As a teacher, we can compromise because in life, there's many room for changes and improvements. So as a teacher, we can choose wisely and be willing to compromise to changes. We need to differentiate instructions for us to see the brighter side and to let them shine in their unique sides and to cater the diversity of the student. Now, can I ask someone who experienced the way? For example, they are good in writing news but cannot deliver the news. They can create a lyrics but not to extent to sing it or plotting music on it. Anyone? Mr. Neil, do you believe or do you experience that you are good in something but not on this extent?
For me po, hindi ko po nararanasan kasi po pag po sa isang bagay po is interested po ako, talaga pong pinagsisikapan ko po. Tapos kapag po hindi po ako interested dun sa isang bagay is nawawalan po ako ng gana. Parang hindi naman sa binabaliwala, parang nag-e-effort ako pero less effort lang po ang ginagawa ko. Hindi po katulad kapag yung mga interested po ako. That's all po.
Thank you. How about Miss Sherry? Do you experience that you are good at this point and then but not on this one?
Yes. Yes po, kasi may kanya-kanya po tayong skills or kakayahan bilang isang estudyante at naniniwala po ako na may mga bagay na, halimbawa, may mga bagay ako na kinakaya mo, tas may mga bagay din ako na hindi ko kinakaya as a student. Yun po.
Thank you. Now, let's proceed to how is instruction differentiated? According to Tomlinson, there are 4 areas where teacher can differentiate instruction. It is by the content, process, product or projects, learning and environment in response to students' characteristics such as interest, readiness, and learning profile. As an overview, differentiation is achieved by providing materials in different levels of difficulties, support, arrangement, and different strategies to evaluate the student productivity, which involve choices from teacher and student. Let's briefly discuss the elements of the curriculum to be evaluated. First is content, figuring out what a student needs to learn and which resources will help. Teachers consider the objective of a lesson, then provide student with flexible option about the content they study to to meet the objective from subject or topic to approach or presentation. Ibig sabihin dito, yung content na nilalaman ng differentiated learning mo is pwede mo siyang iba-ibahin. Kunyari, magaling si Jinky sa speaking, pero si Charis ay hindi magaling sa speaking, kundi mas magaling siya, let's say, sa writing. Then pwede yon. Let's give them a choice or let's be flexible for every student to learn on their own, but you achieve your goal, and that is to learn and be happy on what they doing. Because isipin man natin or hindi, ang student kaya sila natututo kasi nag-enjoy sila. Hindi sila matututo kung sila ay boring. Let's say, paano kung yung iba kaya pala naka-off cam ngayon ay dahil tinatamad na, inaantok na. Pero what if kung sila ay nag-enjoy sa ginagawa nilang to, let's say, kung ari ay may palaro, ari ay may paganto, may paganyan, baka sila ay naka-open cam. And then that is the content of your studies or your learning to the student. Next one is the process. Activities that help students make sense of what they learn. Teachers differentiate how students learn, grouping students based on their individual readiness or to complement each other in one way to accomplish process differentiation. Varying the way concepts are taught through visual, auditory, or kinesthetic lessons. For example, kung ako ba ay magpapakita dito ng mga videos or anything that can, let's say, ako ay mas fond ako sa visual. Sino ang makikinig sa slideshow na text sa ating Gmeet? Or mas gaganahan ako na manood ng video kaysa manood lang dyan ng nakasulat? And that is the process. You know how the student learn based on what they want, kung saan sila mas natututo. And next one is projects. It is a ways for student to show what they know. A teacher might ask student to explain a concept. The product could be a written report, a story, a song, a speech, or any art project. Varying the types of assessment you give student is also example of product differentiation. Dito huhubugin mo, saan ba sila mas komportabling gumawa? Sila ba ay, or let's say, hindi na lang komportabling gumawa. Let's say ito ay kung saan sila mas nag-e-excel. Dito aalamin mo, mas magaling ba sila sa creative or sa text or sa paggawa ng kwento. Next, learning. How the classroom feels. How the class works together. Changing physical things in the classroom. Like how desks are set up or arranged. Or where students can sit on beanbags, for example. Serve as classroom environment differentiation, which can also include changes to routine and habits. Kunyari, mas sanay ang student mo na makalat or let's say, narurumihan or hindi matuto ang isang bata pag may nakikita siyang isang kalat sa paligid. So, ang gagawin ni teacher, aayusin niya. Kasi alam niya na pag may distraction ng mga bata niya, yun ay makakapagpaudlot ng pagkatuto. Next one is, when do we need to differentiate instruction? Is it next year, in the college, in the elementary, in the high school? When do you think it is necessary to use differentiate instruction? Ms. Sherry, when do you think we need to differentiate instructions?
Once na nasa loob po tayo ng school, kailangan ng malinaw na instruction kung paano tayo kung paano gagawin or isasagawa ng mag-aaral yung specific na halimbawa activity, at kasi ito yung magsisilbing gabay para maayos na mai-present ng isang mag-aaral o maayos na matapos ng isang mag-aaral yung isang activity every time, ma'am.
Thank you. Now let's hear from Miss Roseby. Miss Roseby, when do we need to differentiate instruction?
I think we need to differentiate instruction kapag hindi lahat ng estudyante ay nakukuha yung instruction na binigay ng isang teacher. Yun po.
Thank you. Your answer is correct, both of you. As soon as needed. That's when you decided to use differentiate instruction. When you see your students' strengths and weaknesses, you can start changing instruction. Because if you fail to recognize on them on time, then it might affect the student's future on the point. Because they will never see the opportunity to share and blossom with their capability. Let me share my story. When I was in elementary, I was so absent-minded and physically absent. And that's when I think is the root cause. Why am I not physically or let's say creative in the aspect of creativity? Because I wasn't able to learn to draw a physical or a natural human, or I cannot color. That's the truth. That's the truth. I cannot draw. Then, let's move on to the research shows that differentiate instruction is effective for high ability student as well as student with high, mild to severe disabilities. When students are given more options on how they can learn the material given, they take on more responsibility for their own learning. Therefore, every time you have the chance to use this, you should apply it in your classroom. Because every time we use this method, we are able to make changes for the student and their learning capabilities. How is the classroom managed during differentiated learning? We cannot implement this in just a snap of fingers. I cannot just give tasks without direction. Therefore, I need to clear the path for the class to improve. What would you feel if you see that I give different treatment for your classmates or a friend without uttering any words? Miss Karen, do you have any idea? Ano po ang mararamdaman mo, Miss Karen, if ever na ang kaklase mo, binigyan ko siya ng special treatment nang walang sinasabi? Para, let's say, binigyan ko na lang siya ng 100 points. At ikaw, hindi mo alam kung ba't siya binigyan ng 100 points. Ano ang mararamdaman mo?
Ano po, syempre magtataka po ako kasi bakit mo binigyan yon wala namang yung ginagawang halimbawa activity, ganun po.
Thank you. Now, let me hear from Miss Ariel.
Ano po, maku-question ko po kayo, bakit po ganun kung hindi naman po, kung halimbawa po hindi po deserve yung yung mataas na marka dun sa kanyang work po, unless na lang po nakitaan niyo po siya ng ng effort po at saka po yung determination po.
Thank you.
Maari po somehow maiintindihan po siguro yon.
Thank you, Miss Ariel and Miss Karen. Both are your answer are correct. Basically, you're just saying that judgment. You will sort in judgment. Maybe you will say, I have favoritism, or I am more biased, or your classmate is pabibo or sipsep, without knowing what I'm trying to do. So to eliminate the chances of that situation, what should I do? To eliminate the situation like that, I should be vocal, create collaborative activities, and assign roles and responsibility. Let's start to being a vocal. Why do you think being vocal is the first step in managing differentiated learning? Miss Angeline?
Para po sa akin, ang vocal po ay kailangan po. Dahil sa una po, syempre po, paano ka po mag-i-instruct kung hindi mo po gagamitin po yung boses mo para mag-instruct po sa student. Syempre po, kailangan po ng student ng clarification or clear explanation para po lubos na maunawaan po yung instruction ng guro. At saka po, hindi maiintindihan ng student kung ang guro ay ang ipe-present lamang ay PowerPoint presentation nang walang boses na instruction na ginagamit niya. So, kailangan po talaga sa una na yung vocal po is ma-process po. Yun po.
Thank you. We need to be vocal to be clear to everyone that we are doing something for a reason. We can explain the situation for them to see what the agenda or the objective of changing things. The student can also comprehend and look for what best for them and suggest what they needed. Why do you think collaborative activities is important to do in managing differentiated learning? Ms. Diane, do you have any idea why do we think collaborative activities is important to do in managing differentiated learning?
For me po, I think collaborative activities is important to do in managing differentiated learning is because it requires brainstorming, wherein they can share their own knowledges, insights, or ideas to someone who is unfamiliar with some particular topics or things. It really makes them work together, and it also helps them develops their higher order thinking skills that the teacher's responsibility is to unlock those aspects po. Yan lang po.
Thank you. With a collaborative effort to help student, yes, Mr. Neil?
With the help of collaborative in learning is it help us to para pong nakakatulong ito para sa ating mga strengths and weaknesses. Halimbawa po, yung isa po is malakas po dito, tapos weakness po ito ng isa. Pwede po nilang pagtulungan po yun para po maging successful po yung magiging performance or yung magiging presentation po ng student po. Ayun po.
Thank you. With a collaborative effort to help students work in diversity, they can use every uniqueness into strength. They will be productive and work will be influenced with different insights. One example that is anchor activities. They can work in the instruction that will help them to be better, to be productive, work vaccination, instruction time. Bakit kaya mahalaga ang roles and responsibilities sa bahay at sa classroom? Di ba para matuto? Para sa ibang field, let's say, paglabas mo ng bahay, alam mo na agad kung anong gagawin mo or makaka-adapt ka na kung ano ang meron sa labas. Tama? Last but not the least is specifically assigned roles and responsibilities. For every student, we excel at one specific area. For example, you might say, I am great at reporting. But as a teacher, would you put me in a timekeeping? How about the alert student? Or she will become a reporter in the future? In this part, we can see that differentiate instruction, we put our student in the best position, but we let them explore other fields. Before I end my presentation, I would like to read to you the word of wisdom by Carol Ann Tomlinson. Differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular students or small groups of students, rather than teaching a class as though all individuals in it were basically alike. Ibig sabihin, ginagawa natin ang differentiation para tayo ay makapunan ng mga bagay na wala sa isang estudyante pero nag-uumapaw sa isa. Yun lamang po. Salamat.
Thank you, Group 3, for your presentation. Charis, all goods?